what I'm going to talk about is a number of different technologies, and I'll explain some of the issues that you might see in the workplace and how they can be solved by technology. Okay, so one thing I forget to do often is to introduce myself. My name is Jennifer Stirrup. I'm a SQL Server MVP, and I've been one for 4 years. I serve on the board of directors for the Professional Association of SQL Server for PASS, and I hold the seat for Europe. In case you're wondering, my accent, I'm Scottish. Usually the feedback is, oh, I loved her accent. It was so relaxing, I fell asleep. So that's what usually happens. I'm hoping that you'll be so sparked and ignited by the content that that won't happen today. I realize it's just after lunch, it's a dark room, it's a bit drowsy. I do have another favor to ask you. Now, I can't see beyond the second row because there's these big lights in the back shining right into my eyes. So if you see someone next to you with the arm raised to ask a question, I probably haven't seen them. So what you need to do is start a Mexican wave so I can see you, right? Yeah? So you can all do that. And the gentleman at the back, if you can't hear me, please wave, and if I ignore you, please, the point above about the Mexican wave applies. And I'll keep going. So I don't know about you, but I'm an external consultant, and I usually get parachuted into organizations that have made a mess of their data. So we keep hearing about data being the lifeblood of the organization and about how the world's data is doubling in size every 2 years. Yeah? We keep hearing this. That's all very well. But what I tend to see in customer sites is a very different story. I see people struggling with the data that they have already. So we'll talk a bit about Azure ML. We're going to talk about R as well, and how they can benefit you here and now in the businesses that you work in at the moment. Okay. So the story is we have lots and lots of data, lots and lots of information, and none of it's usually very organized. So there's a report by Gartner show that 50% of data held in databases is not looked at. Yeah. So what usually happens is you get these SQL Server DBAs really working hard to protect data that nobody is looking at, right? That's not a good situation to be in. I think often they don't know there's that real distinction between what the technical people think happens with the data and then what actually happens with the data. It's a real shame, actually. And we're promised lots of insights from our data, the gems and the hidden insights. But actually, what we tend to find is in organizations, we have lots of pieces of information we need to join together somehow. And I'll give you a quick example. A customer site I saw quite recently. They were living in Excel, which is fine. Lots of organizations do. If an organization says to you they don't have Excel hidden everywhere, they're lying to you. They will have it somewhere. It will be in their email, in their hard drives, and they're not going to let you near it. Yeah? And most of it will be dirty. There will be no version of the truth. If you really want to see an organization and want to know about an organization, ask to see their Excel spreadsheets. Right? It won't be pleasant and it won't be pretty. Right? I'll give you an example. I was asked, did my usual thing. I had been a customer site for about 2 days. And I asked to see their Excel workbooks because that's how I like to see what they do, because what they do is different from what they say that they do. So I look in the Excel worksheets and I realize they've calculated the median incorrectly. Now you're probably thinking the median, I remember that, we did that at school. Just to remind you, you take the data, you put it in ascending order, and you pick the middle number. Easy, right? People out there probably thinking, my children can do that. You know, my 9-year-old son can do that. But I looked at this organization's data, and the reason they were calculating the median incorrectly was because they were not sorting the data. They were just picking the middle number. So every time they sorted the data, they got a different result. quite wildly different, as it turned out. And the reason they had this data was the number of days that they took in order to answer support calls. So they said it was something like 21 days. And I looked at the spreadsheet and I fixed it. And I said, well, actually, we've gone down to 7 days now. So I go back to the customer and I have to explain to them how to calculate the median. So I go through that, I print everything off Wikipedia. I show them this and I say to them, how long has it been like this? And they said, well, 2 years. And I said, okay, so you've been calculating the median incorrectly for 2 years? And they say, well, actually, it's a bit worse than that. That's in all of our spreadsheets. Okay? And it's worse than that, he said. He said, because 2 years ago we worked out we were calculating the median incorrectly, and we fixed it 2 years ago, although they thought they fixed it, but they hadn't. But that problem had been in place for 2 years before that. So actually, you've ended up with an organization in a real mess with Excel, and they have got 4 years of incorrectly calculated median. So I then say, I fix the problem. I explain to the customer, look, you need to get the basics right first. All this Azure machine learning, all this R is wonderful. But if your data is dirty, you need to start right there. So a month goes by, and having dropped that bombshell on them, I'm doing other things. Then I realize in the company newsletter, they're saying that they've managed to work so hard in the IT department, they've reduced their median length of time to solve cases from 21 days down to 7. And that just tells you so much about the organization. That's what we're fighting against, people, okay? So what happens is we have lots of great stuff coming out of Microsoft at the minute. So we've got Bing, pattern detection. We've got Xbox. So how do we manage to work out how to program these things? So they use something called machine learning. Now, often you hear machine learning, and you'll also hear the term data mining. They're pretty much the same thing. Machine learning is a technical term. Data mining is a business-oriented term. People use them pretty interchangeably. Don't get too hung up in the terminology. The main idea is that it's about trying to use data when you don't have a well-defined question and a well-defined answer. I'll give you an example of that. Has anybody read any books by Malcolm Gladwell? Yeah, about half the audience. He's a great writer. To the other half who've not read him, I recommend that you do. He talks about business puzzles versus business mysteries. And what business puzzles are, they are very well-defined questions with very well-defined answers. What were my sales for last year in a particular product? Very well-defined question with a well-defined answer. But then you get things like this, where you don't have a well-defined answer and you don't have a well-defined question, and you have to do lots of training in order to get the data looking the way that it should. So what you can do is you can try to hardwire and code everything in. That doesn't work quite so well, though. So what we do is we try to generate lots of training data. So Microsoft have been using Azure ML, Azure Machine Learning, and it's actually been in various guises throughout the years. So Bing use it, for example. And we have Xbox using it. I assume lots of people actually use Xbox or have access to one. You know what that is. So what is Azure ML? It's a fully managed cloud service for predictive analytics. Now, I've got some examples to show you. And how many people saw the How Old Robot experiment that they did during the week? Yeah, a few people. I'll show you the website. You can go and play with that. Now, the idea of Azure machine learning is that it's aimed at people who have a mix of business skill and technical skill. So you can also use it if you're a data scientist, but the idea is drag and drop, and it's much more accessible. It's a great starting place. Has anybody here used integration services? Yeah, okay, about half the audience. When you see Azure Machine Learning, it's pretty much like integration services. You have a source, you do something with that data in a series of data flows, and then you put the data somewhere. And that's really what machine learning is doing as well. So the idea is that if your organization is interested in using machine learning, you don't have to buy a lot of expensive tin in order to do it. You can go and try it. If you have got an MSDN subscription, what you'll find is you already have something like £95, which I think is $130 worth of free Azure credits anyway, so it's worth having a look at those. So Azure Machine Learning has got its own built-in algorithms. I'll take you through the interface, but it has its own inbuilt algorithms to use in order to analyze data. You can also use R, and you can use Python as well. Both of these are open source tools. And the idea is that you can use your existing skill set in R or Python, and then start to use it in machine learning. Now, it's also good for the novice as well. There's lots of experiments and things for you to try in there. And what that means is it gives you a starting point. So many people have used R in their organization. Just a few hands. I'm expecting that actually. I only saw about 5 hands go up. Now, R is becoming more and more popular. It's one of the most highly paid skill sets at the moment. So if you take away nothing, just one thing from this session, I would go and teach yourself some R, and when we come back next year, you can buy me a drink for your highly paid data science terminology. Okay, so R is basically the world's most widely used statistical programming language. It's open source, and what that means is you get people in the community who gift their time, basically, in order to generate lots of packages to make things much more easy for you. Now, with R, it's actually pretty easy to get yourself started. I'm going to give you some key resources in order to do that. It's a very insightful programming language to use, and you probably think, gosh, R sounds really complex. It's got lots of libraries. But the thing is, you and I live in a world where people calculate the median incorrectly for 4 years, right? And when you point that out to them, I swear they think you're a genius. Certainly they thought I was a genius. They just, and were amazed. And I think just even a little bit gets you far. So never underestimate the importance of just doing some very small statistics. So just explore the data. I do some work occasionally for the National Health Service in the UK. And what they had a business question. How many days does someone with diabetes spend in hospital? How many bed days? Now that sounds like a really simple thing. You've got the total number of days divided by the total number of patients, and that should give you the average. And that should be easy. But what I found was the minimum number of days that someone spent in hospital was minus 181 days. And I thought, how can you spend minus 181 days in hospital? And so what happened was the admission date came after the dates they were taken out of the hospital. Yeah. So poor person has spent 181 days in hospital, and for some reason the nurse or the doctor had just swapped the dates around. So the admission date was swapped around with the exit date. But that completely threw out the average. And somebody just totaling up those figures would not have seen that the minus 181 days. They just would not have noticed it. So even doing something as simple as taking the minimum and the maximum numbers will really surprise you. The insights fall out of that. So you don't have to worry too much sometimes about doing really fancy algorithms. I know some of the other sessions have talked about really fancy algorithms, but what I tend to find is people are trying to run before they can walk. And if an organization tells you it does not have messy data, they have not looked hard enough, right? It's as simple as that. You will find it hidden in reports. You will find it hidden in the front end. You may find it even deleted, for example. So how do you then go about trying to do your own projects? Now, there's a very, very well-defined methodology that you can use. It's called CRISP-DM. So if you are interested in doing this as a project, this is a framework which I personally use in order to follow that sequence of events. So what I have, first of all, is a business understanding. I want to try and understand what business question are they trying to answer here. Very often they can't tell you that, but they will be able to tell you what they don't want, because users are not very articulate about telling you their business question. But they are extremely articulate at telling you what they don't like. So that's a good place to start. The second part of the process is called data understanding, understanding the data. Now, look, I find when I go into organizations, I see lots of false positives about people understanding their data. They think they understand it and they don't. I'll give you an example. I was doing a big data project, and this customer has said, you know, we're going to spend £3 million, I guess $4.5 million, on kit. We're going to put everything in Hadoop. It's going to be wonderful. We're going to get rid of these SQL servers that don't hold our data very well. So I said, before we go and do that, can we just check your SQL servers are running properly? When did you last optimize them? And you get a blank look, right? And you just think they're not looking after things properly. So I say to them, so tell me, what queries are you running? And they said, well, we're running this query. It's been going on for 3 days. And the output, the transactional log, holding the information about the query, is something like 15 terabytes. It's taken 3 days to run. And I said, at the risk of sounding really simple and stupid, have you checked the query? You know, humor me, right? So then I say to them after a few days later, how did that query work for you? And they said it was wrong. They'd produced a huge Cartesian product of the query. And all they had done was very, very simple mistake. They had joined together data from one system, which had the same column name as another system, put them together. But they were two completely different things, and they created a mess. But the problem is, because people don't understand their data, they do believe that they know it properly, and actually they don't. So, and they will make really large business decisions, like, you know, we're going to put Hadoop in everywhere. They'll make business decisions based on a faulty understanding of the data. And it's not right, but that's what happens. The third stage is preparing the data. So that's basically, if you find any mess in there, try to clean it up. Now, that is actually more difficult. I've been a consultant for about 16 years. And when I say to a customer, well, why don't you try to fix that data at source? I can't think of any examples where they've actually gone and done it, and because they don't want to change anything. Sometimes they can't change anything because the third party is a source, belongs to another company. They can't do anything with it. So what you can do in that case is try to funnel the data down to what you can change, try and put it somewhere else to kick pressure away from the original source system. Oops, sorry. Then we've got the other example, which is modeling the data. Now, there are lots and lots of different models for looking at data. What I suggest you do is there's lots of different models. What you should do is try more than one. So with a very high level, you get statistics where you need to describe the data, and you should always describe it first. And what the test is looking for is what is the shape of the data. So if the data is shaped in the normal curve like that, you can use more robust technical tests. And those are called parametric tests. You can use those if your data is shaped like a normal curve. If it's not, if it's shaped quite strangely, then you can use other tests which are called non-parametric statistical tests. So once you have looked at the shape of your data, you've immediately started to cut down what models and what tests you can do in the data. The fifth stage is evaluating the model. Now, there's lots of different ways that you can do that. There's lots of literature on that. What you need to do is keep testing the model, keep adding new data to it, because once you've finished your Azure machine learning model, that's not the end of the story. because your data will change, your products will change, your customer behavior will change, and it's all about keeping that model up to date as much as you can. The final stage is deploying the model. Now, Azure Machine Learning lets you deploy the model as a web service, so it can be consumed by different programs, and you can use that in real time. The main takeaway point here, now if you look up CRISP-DM, there's a whole manual about this term, about this methodology on the internet, and it's free. So I recommend you go down, download the CRISP-DM manual, and have a good look through it. There's so much helpful information there. It's all about that old business adage, fail to plan, plan to fail. Yeah? So it's all about make sure you've got your plan in place first. Okay. So how can we use technology really to make data-driven decisions? I don't know about you, but I find when I go to customer site or I speak to someone senior in the organization, what I tend to find is there's that resistance. People are often very gut-oriented about their data. They believe things or they don't believe things. What they don't always understand is that their findings are statistically significant to one person only, to themselves, and they might discard or ignore the rest of the data. Now, that tends to be a people process, not a technology one. You might hear this sometimes when a customer will say to you, I don't like that report. And what they actually mean is, I don't like what it says. And that tends to be disguised as things like, they say, well, you gave me a line chart. I don't want a line chart. I want a pie chart, and I want you to change the colors. They're hoping it might change the message of the data. So be very, very careful about that as well. So the thing about trying to adopt data as organizational DNA is your data should be used to imprint your identity in the organization, and hopefully what will happen is people will start to adopt that. Now, the way that people adopt data tends to be through data visualization. You visualize the data. That's why Power BI is particularly important, or Excel. I don't mean to Excel bash. I actually love Excel. I really, really do. I just don't like the way it's used sometimes, and I'm sure you've all got horror stories of how badly you've seen Excel used in your organization sometimes. So with any business intelligence or machine learning project, there's an old adage about people, process, technology. Now, I know that sounds like consulting speak, and maybe it is, but the idea is actually quite a key one, and I've noticed this in my experience. If you have a triangle of people, process, and technology, what you usually find is people focus on the technology. They will say, what technology do I need to buy to solve this business problem? How much of a check do I need to write to make this problem go away? But the truth is, the technology is not always the problem. It's often the people or the processes. So before you start anything with Azure Machine Learning or R, I recommend you have a look at your processes and try to work out, well, how can we make sure that this is bedded into the organization? I'm just going to flip over to a demo. I want to take you through some of these parts. Okay. Sorry, I've lost my mouse. Okay. Oops, sorry. Sorry, I lost my mouse. I didn't want to do that. Okay. Now I'm just going to make this much, much bigger so you can see it. Right. I'm just going to zoom in. Okay. So I hope you can see that. If you are interested in learning anything about R, I strongly recommend that you look at this website called rseek.org. Yeah. So if you're interested in anything, because basically if you can imagine you're trying to have a quick look through the internet and you look up the keyword R, yeah, that's not going to get you very far, right? Okay. So I've saved you hours of your life, okay? It's basically a subset of Google, okay? And what you need to do is just go to rseek.org, type in the term that you want to know about, and that's it. You're good to go. Sorry. Right. So if you want to do that, and you can go to ourprojects.org. So this is Azure Machine Learning on its own. So I'm having a few screen problems here. Duplicate. Just thinking about it. All right, okay. Right, sorry about that. I'm having a few problems with the screen. So I'm just going to try and zoom in. So if you have got any Azure credits, you can also sign up for machine learning. Just go to windowsazure.com. Now, everything is on the left-hand side that you need to use. And if you want to create or upload your own data sets, there's this new button down the bottom. And that basically just tells you new experiments, new data sets. Now, in machine learning, in Azure Machine Learning, they call it an experiment. That's all they call it. And what they actually mean is something really simple like this. I'm just going to zoom in. At very high level, we have got a data source. And I'm going to show you what that data source is. Now, this is the World Data Bank, and what that is basically the charities get together and they try to pool their data. You can use it for analysis, and you can actually use this as a data source if you are using R or Python. It's got an API that means you can go and access the data. The Gini index is almost like the happiness index. It's used to indicate how happy. It's one of the indicators which show how people are happy in their countries where they live. So apparently if you want to live the American dream, you need to go to Denmark, because Denmark is the happiest place, right? Okay. As opposed to somewhere like Sierra Leone or something like that. So a few smiles from Danish people, I think. So there we go. It's called the Gini index. There's some very sophisticated statistics behind it, but what we can do here is download that data. So what I've actually done here is I've downloaded the data. You can download it as a CSV file. Okay. Now I'm just going to go back to Excel. Just here. Right. Now, I'm sorry, I'm having terrible problems with the screen here. Right, let's see. Okay, I've got it here now. Okay, so when we download the data, and I'm just going to increase it so we can see it a bit better. Okay, so what you notice is straight away there's a lot of these data points missing. Now, the reason I've chosen this particular data set is because it's not a clean data set. When I go on site, this is exactly the sort of data set that I would tend to get. Data's missing, there's data wrong, some of the data is in different places, so that's why I chose this one. So let me show you what happens. If we take this data, what we can do is select all, and then we could use that data for Power Query. So I'm going to take Power Query from this table. I'm going to click OK. Now, Power Query is like a self-service data exploration tool, yeah? It can query the data. Basically, what they've done is they've taken the bits that are that in Excel are sometimes a bit hard to find. Things like pivoting and unpivoting the data. So what you'll notice here is a lot of the data points are actually null. Yeah. So for certain countries, for example, like Afghanistan, certain countries like Afghanistan, you can see there's no data there at all. So what happens is if I decide I'm going to pivot the data, or rather unpivot the data, I'm going to select all of these columns. You can see there's only a few data points. Then what I'm going to do is transform the data. So I'm just going to unpivot the columns. Now, when you do that, we can see that there's only one data point for Afghanistan. Yeah. So all of that data is missing. So what happens in Power Query if it just excludes all of the nulls? Now, when you're dealing with missing data in an organization, there's different ways which you can compute or guess at the missing data. Yeah. And there's a few different ways. I'm going to show you how we do that. I'm going to show you in R. So if you just bear with me, I'm just going to swap again. And hopefully I can find it. I'm really sorry about this. I'm having horrible problems with the screen. It appears over here, but it's disappeared off here, so it's completely blank. All right. So I'm just going to apply and load this to the model. Off it goes. Right, so we'll just keep those. I'm just going to keep this worksheet up there for now. So what we can do is I'll go back to machine learning, which is over here. So I've signed in and I've got a very little small script, an R script I want to show you. Now, if you are interested in learning R, obviously start with rseek.org, but you need to look at RStudio as well. Okay. So, so what you need to do is if you are interested in learning R, first of all, you have to install R from the projectr.org website. Now, you need to be careful of the bitness of R. Yeah, just make sure that if you're using a 32-bit machine, that you use 32-bit R. Now, the data held in R is held in memory. And I think one of the really interesting and nice things about the Revolution Analytics acquisition is that Revolution have already thought about this problem, about the scalability of R. And what it means is by putting the data into Azure, you get access to so much more data than you had previously. And that's a really, really useful thing. You don't want to be limited to what's on the laptop, basically. Because companies have got more and more data all the time, so they will need to tackle this problem at some point. So if you take the data, if you install RStudio, you can import the data straight into RStudio. Then it ends up, you get a little script which you can create. Now, the reason I mention RStudio is because I actually think the machine learning over here, actually trying to read and write in that very small pane is very hard, or certainly I find it like that. but I wear glasses, I have done for years. So I tend to craft everything in RStudio first. I take some of the sample data. I'm going to go through exactly what this means. Now, coming back to our example about the missing data, you can do what Power Query does and just ignore anything that's missing. But sometimes that doesn't leave you with very many data points to try and contend with. So what you can do instead is try to, first of all, you can populate the nulls with zeros. And that will give you more data points if you want to try and chart something, because it's all about visualizing the data. And what can happen is, say, for example, you're visualizing data that's in a line chart. If the data is missing points, what you find is it might just go across like a straight line. And that looks like there's data there, but actually there isn't. And then it hides the fact that the data is missing from the people who need to analyze or understand the data in the first place. And if they don't know that the data is missing, then they can't go back and fix it or do anything with it. So that's a real problem. So what you can do is populate with zeros, so at least instead of stretching right, the line stretching out as a straight line, at least you can start to see, well, it hits zeros at certain points. Because the thing is, data visualization is a very powerful tool for trying to help you to analyze and understand data, but it also helps you to find mistakes in the data as well. I'll give you an example of that. I had a customer, they asked me to analyze their data, and they said it was clean because they'd been through a process of cleaning the data. And what I found was I went straight in and started to pull out data about male and female and age ranges. It was a good place to start. But when I looked at a very small count of the data, I could see that the vast majority of people in the customer data set were from Afghanistan, and they were 3 years old. And I thought, well, why have you got so many Afghan 3-year-olds in your customer data set? And they said, well, actually, what happens is when people sign up at the website, they don't choose the right country, and they don't choose their age. So we end up with these Afghan 3-year-olds. So I said, well, you need to have a think about that. So they went back and said they would try and change their website. I never found if they did it. Because the thing is, it's all about, I don't know about you, but I tend to find people blame the business intelligence. They blame the report. Oh, the report is wrong. The report is rubbish. Actually, very often the problem is elsewhere, and it just happens to appear in the business intelligence report, which is why everyone thinks it's your problem. And actually, it's not. The problem is that's the only place it's become visible. And then because it's visible in the business intelligence bucket, that means it's your problem, even though it's not. So that's something to be very aware of with these Azure ML projects and dealing with R. Think about your Afghan 3-year-olds that are hiding in the data, right? And think to yourself, well, have I really looked at this properly first? And I think when we talk about the wonderful things in Azure ML, like neural nets and decision trees and all these wonderful algorithms, that's all very well. But I tend to think customers in reality are really far away from that. And what I'd like to see is Azure ML and R forcing people to think about the quality of their data. Because I don't know about you, but when I look in Twitter, I see lots of information about big data. If you look up that as a hashtag, but I see very little about rights data, because that's a much harder problem. People like to talk about how big their data is. So I'm a SQL Server MVP, so people often come up and say, I've got so many databases with so much data. And I think, well, that's wonderful, but that doesn't mean it's good. A lot of it could just be rubbish. And you have to think about how that appears. But we'll just talk about R here. So the very first line, which is this one, this is a very key line. So what happens is R needs some way in order to talk to Azure ML. You have to let R know about the data. So that's what that line is, basically data set 1. So it's a bit like SSIS. You know when you connect up all of the nodes and you've got your input and your output? So that's what that happens to be. Data set 1 is your data that's coming in at that moment. In this particular example, the data that's come in, I've already uploaded the World Data Bank Genie data, and I've uploaded that to Azure ML. So I did that just to try and make things a bit speedier now. So that's all that little piece of code says. Now, where R differs from SSIS, for example, integration services, you have to be very, very clear about the typing of your variable. Yeah? You've probably used SSIS and thought, oh no, I've used varchar instead of nvarchar. I have to go back and change everything. And that really frustrating error messages that you get. But what R does, R decides on the type of variable dependent on the information you give that variable. So our variable here is simply called dataset1. Very simple name, but what it will say is that is a data frame. Now in R, a data frame is very similar, it's the same thing actually, as a data set in SSRS. Has anyone here used SSRS? Important services? Yep, half again. So basically it's the very same thing as you see in integration services. It's a block of data, rows and columns. So when you see a data frame, just think to yourself that's a data set in SSRS. So that's one reason I've called it data set here, because you'll know what that is. Oh, excuse me. Facebook messages. I've got one friend. How does that work? I just asked him to send me lots of messages. Okay, so I've got data set, and I've got R-binds data set. So what basically that does is it's saying we are going to use this data set, we're going to give it this name. Now, what R does is we have got these little dollar signs here. Okay? And what those dollar signs are, they indicate this is the next thing that comes after it is going to be a column name. Okay? So the column names that I've got here are Genie data status. I'm going to show you what that is. So if we can scroll along. I told you the interface needs a bit of work, shall we say. So I'm interested in this line here, data status. So, because when people think, oh, I'm going to zoom in, sorry, I beg your pardon. That's better. So you recognize in the purple, you see if, else. So I presume most of you are very familiar with writing SQL or writing some sort of code somewhere along the line. R just has the same functionality, a lot of it. So if, else just basically says, if the data set is NA, then replace it with missing data, otherwise return the value, data is present. So all I've done there is create a new column. And this new column is going to say whether the data is present or whether the data is missing. Okay? Now, NA is actually R's version of null. That's all it is. It's like not available. So that's all it is. But when you start to look at these statements, you'll see they're actually very similar to what you know already. So if you write SQL or use reporting services, integration services, you can make that leap from being the BI person in the office to being the R person in the office as well. Hence, salary rise, yeah? So you can do it. It's not a million miles away from anybody. Okay? So what I've done here, talking about SSRS again, this just means I'm creating a new column. Okay? So it's a bit like, does anybody here use DAX? Yep, a few hands, yep, about a third, I guess. So, and you do this in SQL anyway, you create a new column sometimes. And MDX as well. And that's all the syntax is. We've got data set, which is the name of our data set that we're holding in memory. And then we've got the dollar sign. And then I've got my new column name, which I've called Genie value, basically. And the arrow sign is just an assignment operator. It says basically whatever comes after the assignment operator goes into this column. So what we have then is something called as numeric. Now, you're probably used to SQL Server talking about cast and convert. Yeah? And then you've had to go to look at books online to remember what the codes actually are, 101, 102, 120. You know, being a British person, I have to always transfer the date and time to something that isn't month and date. That confuses. As numeric does the same thing, it just returns the integer. That's all it will do. Or it will return the real number. So then we've got this line under it. Now this is actually quite a key thing. I'm going to zoom in again. All right. So here I'm creating another variable, actually, another column. I've just called it main Gini. And basically what I'm doing there is I'm looking for the average Gini freeze, the average value of the Gini value. The reason I'm doing that is I talked earlier about missing values. Sometimes you want to ignore the missing values. Sometimes you want to put zeros in there, just so you can actually show that data is missing, because the line graph will go data, data, 0, 0, 0, data, data. And then at least then you can look at it and say, oh, we've got data missing there. And it might be valid zeros, but at least you've asked yourself the question, is my data missing? Because I don't know about you, but I see when I go on customer site, I see lots of missing data which people have not found yet. And it's just simply because there might be a very valid business reason for it. But until you know about it, you can't go and challenge it. Yeah. You can imagine I'm really popular in site, asking all these questions about people's missing data. All right. So what I'm doing here is you can actually assign the mean instead of assigning zeros. In fact, you could do both. So you could have a column with, and I'll show you the data, where you've replaced any null values with a 0, or you can replace any null values with the mean. And the idea there is you can actually, and because it's the mean, it's not affecting the data in any way. It's just giving you another data point for you to actually visualize. Then what we're going to do is we'll export the result of this into Excel, into Power Pivot. And what you see then is you've got slicers. And you can slice the data so it shows which data was missing and which data do I know about. And then at least you can start to look at your messy data in a different way. So now the important thing here is that the mean calculation in R will return a null if any value is a null, even just one, okay? So if you are trying to calculate the mean, be very, very careful that you're not, if you look at it and think, well, it's not returning any values, it means at least one of those is a null. So what we've got at the very end is this bit here. NA, you'll probably remember, is not available. The data's not there. RM equals 2, equals T, equals true. And what that basically means is, if you find any NA values, any null values, ignore them. That's all it is. It just takes them out, that extra tiny bit of code. And what that means is, when we calculate the mean value, we will actually get a result this time. So it's one of these things that R will return you no value if it finds any nulls. So this is another really simple if-else statement. So basically, if you take the same data, and if we find the data is missing, then we replace it with a 0. So that's given us different ways of handling our missing data. The reason I'm exploring missing data is because it's something I see quite a lot, and it's something you can help to resolve when you look at R. R has also got a lot of functionality about interpolating the data. And what that really means is, if you have data for some years and not others, it will try to work out statistically what the missing data points are. We're not going to cover that today because we don't have time, but at least it gives you the opportunity to try and think about, well, how can I make some value of this data and do something with it? Because missing data is actually really one of these things that seems to happen so much. So then we've got our data, and if in Azure, what we would then do is run this experiment. Now we've got a run button down the bottom here, and we would just execute that. Now I ran this earlier just to save some time. It's almost as disheartening as watching a reporting services report tick over. you know, that green thing going round. So I didn't want to subject all of you to that. So you can see by the tick boxes it's worked anyway. You get the little green tick mark just here. Okay. Hello, I see.
The size of the data is very large. How long does the process take? Can you scale that?
Sorry, I'm just going to repeat the question.
Sure. If the size of the data is very large, how long would that process take? Can you scale that to run on multiple processes?
That's a good question. I'm just going to repeat that because I've got the benefit of the microphone. So the question is, can we scale out the data in the cloud? I think what will happen is with the Revolution Analytics acquisition, that's exactly what you'll be able to do. If you can't use cloud but still want to use R, because some people can't use cloud, what you could do is look at the Revolution Analytics website. They've got something called R Hadoop, and that can mean you can go and access your R data through Hadoop. And there's another R package called Scale R. Yeah, you end up sounding like a pirate because everything is R all the time. So is that lots of pirate jokes? So with my accent as well, it probably comes across as well. But I think there's different ways you'll be able to scale out the future. I mean, it's futurology, but I really think actually the Revolution Analytics acquisition is it's like a new Microsoft for me. And the reason I say that is because I think it's one of the most exciting things I've done for a while. As much as I love Power BI and I love data visualization, I really think the Revolution Analytics addresses these sort of problems like scaling your data so you're not just restricted to the memory on your laptop. I think that's, for me, is the beauty of it. And also secondarily, for me, I think it allows people to check their data or at least think about checking their data. Now, you can do a lot of these statistics in Excel as well. You can go and download some add-ins that will help you to do that. And that's fine. I think you can do both. But I think sometimes if you just do it in Excel, it's very easy for that workbook to get lost or for things to be updated and changed. And before you know it, your results are no longer correct. Whereas if you do it in R, what I like about it is the workflow. I can give somebody a script, so I could give you my script, and you could say, right, I'm going to double check this. Because I'm a bit funny. I like to double check everything, and I like other people to double check what I've done. So basically, I want to know that I'm right, and if I'm not right, I want to capture that. I'd rather clean up first than try to do a mop-up afterwards before the customers see it. Yeah, it's just a very simple thing. Because the mistakes will always come back and bite you in the bottom, right? There's no getting around that. So it's just about trying to sort it out at first. Hello?
How do you install a package?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I can't hear you very well.
Install a package, like forecast is a package, right? Install that package. So when we tried it, actually, it took a 45 minutes and never installed it. We have to do that way.
I'm just going to repeat your question and then I'll answer it if that's okay. So the question is, in R, you get over 6,000 packages, and what you need to do, R is a bit like .NET Studio. You need to install libraries, and then you call the libraries. Now, I've taken the quick route here. There's about 300 or 400 packages installed already in Azure ML. What I think at the moment is more and more of those packages will be installed as time goes forward. So what you could do, and I haven't tried this, is what you could do is try to set up a variable and see if you could call something externally, try and do it that way. But I haven't seen a way of installing the packages directly into Azure ML. There is, if I have time at the end, there's a small piece of code which will read out exactly what our packages Azure ML have got at the minute. What you might do is a bit of a mix. So you could do some of your R scripts programming locally, install packages there, and then see what you can take up to the cloud. I think, well, I don't work for Microsoft, so I don't know what's coming next. But I think what you could do is go to something like connect.microsoft.com and start to say, make connect calls, basically, to say we would like this particular package installed as part of Azure ML. I think, for me, it's quite interesting because you've got the open source paradigm, which R has been developed under, Now, that's actually very different from developing software in a corporate environment. So if you speak to someone at Microsoft and they'll say, well, we're going to do this, that, and that because it's in my workflow and this is what they're going to do. So it's all very regimented. But the open source environment is very much more fluid. It's people doing it in their bedrooms, some of it. So I think it would have to go through some sort of process in order to be put into Azure ML. But I actually think it's a really exciting time because it gives you a good head start. As I say, there's so many of them. You even get R packages, which will download that comic XKCD, you know, the maths comic, yeah. So if you like that, there's even an R project that will go and download that. And there's all sorts of wonderful examples there. I found an R script last week which went and visualized the Crayola crayons and how they appeared over time. So you get all sorts of crazy things going on as well. But to come back to your question, I couldn't see any easy way of installing packages in the cloud. You could try to call them remotely using HTTP and see if it will take that. Otherwise, you might have to do it locally. So sorry, just to get back to this. What you can see at the bottom here is the output. And the important bit here is that you can output the data to CSV. Yeah. Now, I deal with lots of different software, lots of different business intelligence software, include Tableau and ClickView and all these other wonderful tools that you get. But the most common, one of the top most common buttons is usually export to CSV. Yeah? Because what happens is people want to download the data and play with it themselves. So even though you've run through that algorithm, you've thought, right, I'm going to replace missing data, I'm going to change that, then I'm going to check it, and maybe upload that result set back into Azure ML if you wanted to do that, to do further analysis on it. Then at least you've got the data in a format which people can understand. Because the whole point about Azure ML is it's supposed to be accessible for people like you and I, who are business intelligence professionals and who perhaps maybe don't have maths degrees or PhDs in maths and so on and so forth, or statistics. So I think that's what's important about it, is it is accessible. Now, I've also looked at other Azure ML, I've also looked at other machine learning tools. So I've had a quick look at the Google one, and I've had a quick look at the Amazon one as well. Now, I felt that they were much more developer-oriented. It was a very specific skill set. But when I looked at the Azure ML one, I thought, well, actually, I can see this seems to be more accessible because a lot of the packages are pre-built already. And I think because you're using R as well, you also have the opportunity to learn a bit of R, use it in Azure ML, or just use it on its own, however you see fit. So when we download the data set, you get lots of little options here. So you can visualize the data, save as data set, or generate an access code. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to... You need to bear with me, sorry, I can't see this screen at all, so I've got the data there. Sorry. It's always the last one you choose, isn't it? All right. Okay, so what we can see here is I've just done a really simple, visualization. But the key thing is actually about trying to identify what data is present and which data is missing. So you notice for Afghanistan, Albania, Algeria, all of those numbers are the same, and those are basically the median. And so what you can do is just use the median, or you can replace with nulls. So let's escape out of that. If I go here, what I want to do is find the field list. So I've got the field list over here. What I want to show is it with zeros as well. Okay. So we can start to see that for Afghanistan down to the Arab world, the data has either got the mean in it, which is the mean of all the Gini. We removed all of the nulls, so it just will be the mean of the data points that it has already, or we can replace them with zeros. But the idea is if it was a much larger data set, it would give you an idea of the quality of the data. Now, looking at this data set, let's see how many data points we actually have. We can see here that data is present actually only accounts for quite a small subset of the actual data. So what we could do is go back and say, look, there's so much of this data is actually missing. It may not be worth analysing it at all. You need to go back and get a completely fresh data set. Or it just gives you more tools for the tool bag, really. So if you start to look at the data that's actually missing, what it does mean is you can start to look at the data, give it the mean of the zeros, and then start to visualize that. So if we look at the data that is present, I'm going to try and insert a chart here. Let's see if it will let me. So there's a pivot chart there. I'm going to click OK. Oops. So basically it will start to look a bit messy. But then we can start to take some of the data out and say, right, actually, we don't want to see all of these data points, and start to just see the ones that you want to see. I've got one last thing to show you, which is a bit more about R. And I'm just going to bring up R Studio. I'm really sorry about this. I can't see the screen in front of me. So I feel like really that I'm ignoring everyone. So I'm sorry about this. So let's see if we can see this. So this is R Studio. And if you want to play with R itself, what you see is straight away is at the top is split into 4 parts, basically. You can start to look at the data, and you can import the data using CSV files. So this would be our World Bank data, CSV, and you would just basically load that in, and you'd have it as a variable. I've got, different tabs there. So I can start to see which data points. So if you wanted to actually go and get the data for the World's Data Bank, that would be the codes to do it. And basically what happens there is it calls the library, goes to the World Data Bank, and then it will use the API and get the data back for you. Okay. So you can do some quite nice visualizations. I'm hoping this is the one I'm looking for. Okay. So if I take out this bit, I'm sure that bit doesn't work. You can load all sorts of different libraries in here, like we were saying earlier. So what this little bit of code does, and I like this is why I'm showing it to you, is let's go rid of that. You do get powerful visualizations in R itself. So what this will do is it will allow you to play around with the data like that, yeah? Now, I'm not saying it's a replacement for Excel or for Power BI. I'm just saying it's something you could use as well as, because R in its own right has got some really powerful data visualizations tools. And if you give this to business users, they're going to love it, right? Because they can even spin it upside down if they want, yeah? So they're going to love things like that. And it's got some nice visualizations you can do, which are pretty hard to do in Excel. Let me show you RStudio. So here's one I did earlier, which I'm hoping is still there. If it's not, I will run it again. Okay. So that data is actually just a quick visualization. I've taken some analysis data and I've just put it in terms of a trellis chart. Now, that only took us seconds to do if you know the code. The code is actually over here. And basically, this sort of thing called plot is that will, what happens is if you call that command, plot R will go away and it will try to work out the best plot for you. So even if you think, well, I'm not a statistics person, R isn't really my thing, but you are a data visualization person, you might want to install R anyway, because it will give you some really nice quick visualizations just like that. And the reason for that is just they're already inbuilt. So let's see, I thought I had another one, but I can't really see it properly. I'm sorry, I can't see the screen very well, but you get the idea. Okay, so just to summarize, Azure ML and R are both really, really powerful tools. In my experience, I tend to find that the data is not in order for people to use either thing. So coming back to our crisp DM model, which was in here. I'll use that one. Coming back to the crisp DM model, if you are looking at these things, be very, very careful that you are actually going to use the right data for the right thing. I'm just going to bring that model up again. Sorry, I can't see this. Right. There we go. So what I tend to find is there's a lot of interest in Azure ML, but if you just try and do yourselves a favour, don't just dive in, think about the quality of the data first, what it is you're trying to do with it, and you'll get much more successful results just by simply taking that step back before you take a step forward. Azure ML, very powerful, and go and try it, definitely. There's lots of samples there. Go and play around with it. I would recommend you install R, not just for the stats side of things, but also for the data visualization. It does some really nice things, and I think your business users will really love it. So with that, I hope you enjoy playing with these tools. And if you get any questions, my name's Jen Stirrup. If you give me a shout out on Twitter. I like Twitter because it's really small, and your question will be really simple, probably, which means I'll probably be able to answer it really well. No, but seriously, if you want to just give me a shout out, that would be fine. Does anyone get any questions, comments, thoughts? Oh, hello.
Hi, so I can create this visualization in R, but how can I publish them for
Yeah, I'll just repeat the question. Thank you. Yeah. If you want to use the visualizations in R, it will export them as a picture for you. So go to plot, and then you can export just here. No, it's all installed just on the machine, actually. So like the little one with the plot, zooming back and forth, that's actually just it's a piece of code, basically, which generates another window. So that you can't really, unless you actually physically sit with them and show them. But other pictures like that, you can export as JPEGs, or you can import them as PDFs. Because sometimes, I don't know about you, but I do like a dashboard reporting packs, and they don't actually need to be dynamic. So I'm hoping over time that some of these visualizations will find their way into Power BI. You can use them in Azure ML as well. If you do the output as an R device, and it will export the data at that point. So it's quite cool. There's a lot there, I think. A lot of fun. Well, I thought I had fun anyway. Hello.
So, I think RStudio, does it mean that you just to write the script, what you wrote, show in a ML, and in a ML you just put that series inside
Yes.
it? Okay, so
That's right.
Used for writing code, and then of course visualizing.
Yes, so that's exactly right. I'll just repeat that so people can hear. So yeah, so what you should do is write the code in RStudio first. You can see the results. I personally find the Azure ML window really small. You can upload the code, copy and paste, or what you could do is upload it as a script, because Azure ML will take zip files as the code. So you could do that as well. I don't have any code to show you that, but if you look at some of the samples for Azure ML, there are actually some examples which show you that. There's quite a few, actually. The one that you might want to look at is the Standard & Poor 500 Wikipedia ones. It shows a clustering example, and it's got some RStudio code embedded in there, and there's some comments there about uploading R scripts as a zip file. It just uncompresses them and uploads them. So hopefully that helps a bit. Thank you. Oh, hello.
So anyway, you can get a list of packages already installed.
Mhm. Oh, yes, that's right. I'll show you that. So I can't see anything, and I keep leaning over this. All right, so let me see. Because I wrote a package to do that, actually. So I'm just going to go back. Experiments. Sorry. Read out of packages. We'll go for that one. I think it's this one. So all I did is I've got a little script in here. I'm just going to zoom in. That's all it does. I'll actually run that just now, and let's have a little look at it. Because there are about 6,100 packages, and I think it's just early days. I think the others will come online, because there's so many popular ones, and they've been added all the time, new ones. It would be nice to keep up.
If you are an MVP already there, we can take this because there is a very famous package called forecast.
All right, okay.
I think it is there actually. It is the fundamental for forecasting.
I will have a look, actually. They've left this running, and is it doing anything? I don't know. Let's see. Yeah, because I'll have a look for that. Because you're right, forecast is like one of the main ones. You will get forecasting in Power BI, but it's good to have it in R as well, because usually customers will ask the question, well, how did you get that data? And what I like about R is you can trace back exactly how you got that data. Well, this goes from here to here to here, and you can, it's because it's testable, you can run data through it and show them. It gives them confidence in the data, I think. So if I do download, and open, there's a package.
Okay.
So I'm just going to scroll down. Sorry, I can't see that very well. So you were looking for forecast, weren't you? So, oh, sorry. All right, it says it's there. And it says... Oh, okay.
Then we tried to install that package.
Oh,
We
okay.
thought it would be downloading from time and we would install, but never.
So maybe I'll just try one of the forecast against one of the examples. Maybe it's in one of the samples, just to see if you can get something really simple and basic working first, and then see if it builds up. But according to this, it is one of the installed packages. Yeah. Hello, sorry. Yes, I did. That's right. rseek.org is a good one. So I can only see this screen over here, and my eyesight's not great, so I'm having to. So if I suddenly disappear, it's because of that. So I recommend rseek.org. RStudio is something you should definitely use.
Thank you.
That's okay. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Now, I used, what's it called? I can see it as, I think it's Amazon.co.uk. And I think it was something like beginning data science with R. And it's one of those books with a funny cover with the older gentleman on it. Let me see if I can find it. No, it wasn't that one. It was a Manning book. Manning. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't see you just under there. I think it was this one. Yes, that was the one. I liked this one because it was business oriented as well as technical oriented. So it starts off straight away by saying, here's how you run one of these projects. And it just didn't dive in and start talking about statistics, which a lot of them do. And it gave you that sort of framework, and I liked that. Because it made sense, because a lot of people using R are coming from that angle as well as the technical. So I think I personally found this one to be the best book. Hello? Yeah. I use RODBC. So I would bring that up for you. Sorry, it's here somewhere. Oh, sorry, that's my email. You don't really want to see that. Okay. My email is really boring. It's all stats and SQL. RODBC. So there's a library you can call. I'm just going to see if I can find that. So that's probably a bit detailed. Let's see if we can find a better one. Yeah. Yes. Oh, thank you very much for your help. Thank you. Yes, exactly right. So you just use, like anything else, set up the ODBC, and all our ODBC does is it will connect to that ODBC, go and get the data and bring it back again. But my hunch is because with Revolution Analytics that will become more streamlined in the future, because otherwise you're calling packages and you think, well, if they own SQL Server and they're doing lots of R, then how would you make that better? Like a connector? Even like, my guess is if it was me, I'd want it in Power Query as R. You know, just to go off and just go and get the data and bring it back again. Oh, sorry, thank you. Oh, hello. Sorry, I'm just coming off just now, sorry.